Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to stitch in the state flower embroidery patterns. All of the states have their own different flowers, so it makes it fun to do this as a collection or do a single one from your home or make as a gift. It's really an awesome pattern to have and to work with. I'm going to start with stitching out the California one, and we are going to learn about stitching in flowers specifically. For learning more about stitches and how to make beginner stitches, make sure to check out my other videos that walk you through the different techniques in stitching, and make sure to go check out my other videos where I have different stitches demonstrated. And in the instructions that come with every kit, it has a link to the individual stitches that we'll be talking about. But the techniques that we use in the California kit are going to be pretty much what we use in all of them. And I will be showing a couple other states and how we do the different kinds of flowers in this video. So let's get started. So I've already placed and centered my fabric in the hoop. We've tightened it down to make sure that it's not going to go anywhere. And I've put it in my embroidery stand so that I can demonstrate the video. It's not something that's necessary, but it definitely helps me for this. I've also threaded my needle. I have 2 strands of floss on my needle right now. For more help on tying this knot, putting a fabric in the hoop, threading the needle, information on the thread and how we use the 6-strand embroidery thread, make sure to check out my other video with the beginning stitch sampler. And now that we've got that all set up, let's just get right into it. So I'm going to start with this bigger flower, and we are going to use a satin stitch to fill in the petals. So I bring my needle up over here and down, back down. And the first thing I'm going to do is make a skeleton of my satin stitch. So when we have a shape that is not just a line, like a rectangle or anything like that, we want to build this little skeleton that will give us a general outline of where we need our stitches to go. That way, as we're stitching, we make sure that we are bending at the right times, and it'll help incorporate those angles in a more natural look. Okay, now that I've had my little skeleton filled in, I'm going to go back and fill in the stitches in between. And when we do irregular shapes like this, we have to add in what I call cheater stitches. So they don't go the full length of the shape. We'll do little like half stitches. And that'll help us get the right blend without having a ton of bulk in the thread down here at the base. So now that I finished the light orange on this flower, I'm going to move over to this flower and do the same thing. The only main difference is that these petals are at different angles. So I make sure that with my satin stitch and my skeleton that I'll follow those angles. And then this one right here is going to actually be stitched in the darker orange, which I'll get to in the next step. So now I like the way my skeleton's set up, and I'm just going to go around and fill this in. Right here where there's this big piece that's going to be filled in with the darker color, I did put a couple small stitches. I don't want it to be totally blank between that and the center, but it's just going to be enough to show what it would look like if there was, if this was a real flower, there would be a little bit of that lighter orange showing through there. So now I'm just going to fill it all in, and I'll meet you back here. So once I'm done filling in shapes, especially with the satin stitch, I like to go back and check if there's any gaps or any places that might benefit from having an extra little stitch thrown in. So I'm going to add one up here And you can just kind of go around the flower wherever there's like maybe little gaps or anything like that. Adding these extra stitches over the top help perfect the overall look of the piece that you're working on. So next we're going to use our red orange floss, which is the darker color that comes with your kit. And we're going to take 2 strands of it again, and we're going to fill in these other parts of the flower that were missed by the lighter orange. So let's start by building out the skeleton. Now it might be tempting when you're making this to just stitch across the long way of this shape, but the stitch direction is so important to the overall finished look of the piece. And when we're doing flowers, or any kind of satin stitch really, paying attention to the stitch direction is very crucial to making the project look as good as it can. And each state has directions for how to stitch, which direction, and all of that information that you need to make your project look beautiful. So I am going to get over here and fill in the side of this petal, but before I do, I'm going to add a little bit of shading in with this darker orange color. So the first thing I'm going to do is stitch in between where the original petals were. And this stitch, we don't really need it to be super visible, but having it there is going to give the flower dimension and make the petals a little bit more differentiated, especially in this one where they all kind of were in the same little group. And now that I have the petals kind of marked out, I'm going to take my red orange floss that's still on, and I'm going to take just a couple of shorter stitches going up the petal all the way around the flower. Next step, we have 3 strands of green floss on my needle, and we're gonna fill in the stems. So this is super fun where they're all kind of wavy and twisted around each other. Filling this in is so fun. So we're gonna use a stem stitch. Big surprise on that one there when we're doing stems. And the way you do that is so you come up and down about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch apart. And then you take your needle before you pull the thread all the way through. You take your needle and come up right in between where you laid those first 2 parts of the stitch. And when you're just getting the hang of it, just practicing the stitch for the first time, start on this straight line or any of the more straight lines before you move on to the curvy lines. And so for the second one, when you come up, you actually bring your needle right up to this end point of the first stitch and then pull it tight. Have these little ends here that we're going to come back and add what will look like the flower buds. But when you get to the end, I just made this last one a little bit shorter than the other stitches. And we're just going to do a simple little straight stitch that kind of ties the flowers or the stem back to the main part of the stem. So I have 4 strands of the red orange floss on, and I'm going to use 3 to 4 wraps to make each knot. And I've touched on this in other videos on how to make the French knot. You bring your needle up and your thread right exactly where you want the knot to be. Then you take it and you wrap the base of that thread around the needle and then stitch right next to the hole where you first came in. And then you pull it tight. Varying the number of strands and the number of wraps you use changes the texture of the knot. Now for the last few steps of this state embroidery pattern, I have 2 strands of black floss, and we are going to finish the center of the flowers by doing a petal stitch. So with a petal stitch, you come up and down right next to each other, not in the same spot, but right next to each other. And then before you bring the piece all the way down, you make another tack like in front of it, and then tack the stitch in place. That makes this cute little rounded shape. So I'll show you again. So we come up and down right next to itself, come up a little higher, and I'm coming up into the petals that I've already stitched, into the orange, just to make it look more realistic. And then once I have that to a cute little rounded shape, not pulling it so tight because I want to be able to still see the round, and if you pull it tight, it'll just like straighten out that end. Once I have it to the tension that I want, I bring this back down to tuck it in the right spot. Okay, so we have our little centers done of our flowers, and next we're gonna do what every state kit has in common, is we're gonna trace the outline of the state. So we made these really fun where you get to kind of trace the state around the flower and kind of work with it. We're gonna just use a back stitch, which is just like the most basic of the embroidery stitches, but it's my favorite one. So you make one little stitch like that, and then you come up about the same distance apart, and you take your needle and put it back in the same hole where the last stitch was placed. So even though on the long parts of the states, like where we have these straight lines, we'll keep our back stitch length the same. On these squiggly parts, you have to vary the length of the stitch quite a bit just to make sure that you get the right curves and points at the right times. So these ones are very short, but the ones that will be on the straight will be a little bit longer. When you get more comfortable with it, you can start making it go a little bit faster by when you pull your thread through and you have it right here, you bring it up to the next spot so that you're only doing that pulling motion one time instead of twice. And it's not like the stem stitch because we're not overlapping where our stitches are. See, this just starts the next one after that. So we definitely want the flower to be the focus of this embroidery project. So when you get to the point where the flowers and the stems like overlap the state, but we have little pieces of the state we want to stitch, make sure that your black stitches are not going over the top of your other stitches. So like I just brought that little guy down under here, and you can see the template for the state going around the flower. I think this part is so fun when you get a stitch in the state and see how it really all comes together. And if the space is really small and not very noticeable in between your pieces, then you can just skip over it. I stitched in this one just because I could barely see it, but if you have any less room than that, it's going to be hard. So there's the basics on filling in a state flower embroidery pattern. Let's take a look at another state. This is the pattern for New York. So we're going to put this in the hoop, and I'm going to show you what to do on these petals and what makes them different from the petals that we just stitched on the California. So the rose can be a little intimidating. This is the state flower for several of our states, but it's really just a satin stitch. So if you take a closer look, you can see that I filled in, this is all the same color. It's the darker red that's included with the kit. I've filled in these darker spots, and in every petal section, I've done a different direction of the stitching. So this outside one, the stitches are going this way. Right here, they're going up and down. They're also going up and down right here, but because these don't touch, it works. And I just try to follow the natural direction of the petal. And as you fill it in, it gets easier as you practice more. So the first one might feel kind of sloppy, but as you go, you're gonna notice how much you improve even just going around the same flower. So I'm gonna take my lighter red floss that's included. This is 2 strands each, and I'm gonna fill in these other spaces and show you how different it looks when you just have the different directions. I always love the last stitch in a project to see exactly like how it all comes together. It looks so awesome. So you can see that most of what makes this rose great is just that it's the direction of the stitches in the petals. So we do have the different colors and the contrast is awesome, but you just have to pay attention to that direction. And even though every state flower kit is going to look different with their different flowers, that's something that you'll pay attention to in all of them, is the directionality of your stitches, how they line up, and making sure that we keep the separation in the petals. Another type of state flower you're going to see is these kind that come in clusters. So this is Washington State. And when we're stitching this, we want to start in the center flower or the ones that are complete. So the flowers that are full, like this one is, this one's mostly full. We begin with those, and just like I showed you before, we make our little skeleton of this and then fill in the stitches around it. When we get to the outside ones that aren't complete flowers, do the same thing where you make your skeleton of your shape. And this just helps guide your stitches so you know what direction you're going to go. It helps you feel like your stitches are complete. And when there's a lot of layers, it's especially helpful to do the skeleton stitch so that you know where you're going. So now that I've done my skeleton or my little outline, I'm going to go back and fill it in. So the main thing with the clustered flowers, just like in the petals, is you want to give each space its own identity. So even though we have the same colors stitched right next to each other, when you stitch it in the groups, as shown in the outline, then you'll be able to tell the difference between the flowers. If you enjoyed stitching out your state, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any more embroidery tutorials or any of our fun new patterns. We're always coming out with new ones, and hope you enjoy your stitching.